He was a 5-year-old boy, lost in a world of silence since his mother's death. His billionaire father had hired and fired the best therapists in the country. I was just a cleaner, an immigrant with a painful past, forbidden from even speaking to the child. One day, I broke the rules. I blew a single soap bubble. I was fired for it, but what happened in the moments after changed everything and taught a grieving family the true meaning of a miracle. The millionaire fired his maid for blowing bubbles. Then, his autistic son said his first word in years. In a world that worships perfection, my life has been a study in the beauty of what is broken. My name is Anna, and I am a cleaner. I am one of the quiet, nameless people who exist in the spaces between other people's lives. I carry a soft accent from a country that no longer feels like home, and I carry eyes that have seen too much to ever be truly young again. I came to the United States to rebuild, to disappear, to find something gentler than regret. I found a job cleaning one of Hollywood's grandest estates, a house wrapped in staggering wealth but hollowed out by grief. My job was simple: be silent. Scrub the floors, polish the wood, vacuum the cavernous rooms no one used, and vanish before the sunset. No one in the house knew my last name, but I knew every secret of the house. Every creaky floorboard, every loose tile, every speck of dust hiding behind the bronze statues. I was a ghost, and that was how they wanted it. And then there was Leo. Leo Sterling, the 5-year-old son of my employer, was a ghost of a different kind. He was the silent, beating heart of the house's sorrow. He hadn't spoken a single word in over a year, not since the sudden, shocking death of his mother. Her absence had frozen something deep inside him, something that words and the world could no longer reach. Therapists, the best money could buy, had come and gone. They arrived with their gentle voices, their strategic playsets, and their leather-bound notebooks. They left with sighs of professional frustration. Then one April morning, like any other, I was scrubbing the stone walkway behind the Sterling estate, my knees pressed into the cold, hard ground. The $15 million house was steeped in its usual oppressive quiet, the heavy air of grief a permanent fixture. Leo was sitting at the edge of the yard under a blooming cherry tree whose beauty no one else seemed to notice. His small back was curved like a question mark. I had seen him there many times, a small, still statue in a world that was too loud and too fast for him. The staff had been given strict orders: do not engage with the child. Leave it to the professionals. I never argued, but I knew what that kind of silence meant. I knew it wasn't a treatment. It was a surrender. As my hand brushed against the soapy water in my cleaning bucket, a memory, vivid and bittersweet, rushed back. I was a little girl again, in the sweltering churchyard of my village, before the war, before we immigrated. My cousin and I would mix cheap soap and water in chipped porcelain cups and blow bubbles through plastic straws. For hours we would chase those shimmering iridescent spears, our laughter echoing in the summer air. They were like little, fragile ghosts of joy. That simple, forgotten memory returned to me with an unexpected force. I glanced over at Leo. He was still motionless, his eyes fixed on the ground, his small hands clamped tightly between his knees, as if he were holding himself together. I hesitated. I knew the rules. I was not allowed to speak to him. But I didn't need words. I dipped my hand into the soapy water, the suds cool against my skin. I lifted my fingers gently to my lips, and with a soft, steady breath, I blew. A single bubble bloomed into existence. It was delicate, gleaming, catching the sunlight in a rainbow of colors. It drifted slowly, spinning on an invisible current. I didn't look at Leo. I dare not. I kept my eyes fixed on the bubble, but from the corner of my eye, I saw him. I saw his head lift slowly, his eyes widening with a quiet, cautious surprise. He followed the bubble's silent, graceful dance as if it were something sacred, something he recognized from a world he had lost. He reached out a small, hesitant hand, his fingers brushing the air just beneath it an instant before it popped and vanished. Then his gaze shifted. He looked at me. For the first time in the 6 months I had worked in that house, our eyes met. I said nothing. I didn't smile. I didn't coax. I just gave him the smallest, most imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement that said nothing more than, "I see you." And then the impossible happened. Leo smiled. It wasn't a bright, toothy grin. It was the faintest, smallest curl at the edge of his lips, but it was enough to tear a hole in the thick blanket of silence that surrounded him. I didn't move. I knew this moment was as fragile as the bubble itself. One sudden move, one word spoken too loudly, and it would vanish. So instead, I just blew another. This one drifted higher, brighter. Leo watched it, and when it disappeared, he looked at me again. Not with surprise this time, but with a quiet, waiting expectation. Upstairs in his sterile, glass-walled office, Nathan Sterling paused mid-call. His eyes were locked on the live feed from the garden security camera. He watched his son, his silent, unreachable son, not just alive, but engaged. With whom? He zoomed in. A cleaning woman. A nameless face he barely recognized. He didn't know whether to feel a surge of hope or a spike of threatened anger. But outside, in the warm April sun, I blew one more bubble, and Leo, still silent, followed its fragile dance as if he were hearing an old, forgotten language spoken just for him.
The next morning, I expected nothing to have changed. I arrived as usual, slipped through the back door, and checked the long list of chores clipped to the fridge. Wipe the foyer, dust bedroom 4, scrub mildew from the north wall. A list designed to preserve the illusion of a perfect, orderly home. I filled my bucket and stepped out into the garden. Leo was already there, sitting in his usual spot beneath the cherry tree. But today he was holding something in his hand, gripping it with a focus I had never seen before. As I came closer, I saw it was a crayon, the color of a summer sky. I said nothing. I made no sound to announce my presence. I simply knelt nearby, a silent companion. Then, slowly, carefully, Leo leaned forward and, on the stone patio, drew a small, perfect circle. When he finished, he looked straight into my eyes, his gaze steady and full of a quiet confidence. He patted the ground beside the circle. It wasn't a request. It was a sacred, wordless invitation. My heart lodged in my throat. I gently sat down, my legs crossed, my presence as soft and unthreatening as I could make it. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. That circle was a gesture that said everything. This space is safe. This space is ours. He returned his focus to the ground and began to draw a second circle, slightly larger, shading it in with slow, patient strokes. I watched his small hands move with such intent, as if he were recreating something important from a memory. Quietly, I pulled a small notebook and a pen from my apron pocket, the kind I used for grocery lists. I opened to a blank page and drew the same circle he had made. Not to mimic, but to mirror. He glanced up at the soft scratching sound of my pen on the paper, then turned back to his own drawing. He didn't object. In fact, he inched slightly closer. Just a fraction of an inch, but to me, it felt like a mile. Inside the house, in his office, Nathan Sterling's world had tilted. He had lifted his head from a meaningless spreadsheet and clicked open the live garden feed. What he saw made his hand freeze. His son was still in the garden, but something was fundamentally different. Elliot was no longer just watching me. He had invited me in. Nathan replayed the footage again and again, watching the silent, simple scene unfold. The circle, the gesture, my acceptance. The simplicity of it was like a stone in his throat. He hadn't seen his son willingly reach out to another human being since his wife, Helen, had died. He had hired the best child psychologists, the most renowned therapists. None had broken through. And yet I, Anna, the cleaner, with no degrees, no credentials, with nothing but soap bubbles and patience, had been granted an invitation into his son's silent world. He leaned back in his chair, his throat tight with a feeling he couldn't name. It wasn't exactly jealousy. It was shame. Shame that his son had finally opened up, but not to him. That night, for the first time in over a year, Nathan stood outside his son's bedroom door. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Finally, he rapped gently, twice. There was a pause, then the faint rustle of movement. The door didn't open, but the important thing, the monumental thing, was that he had knocked. I wasn't surprised when I was summoned to the main office a few days later. I knew this moment would come. I could feel the shift in the house's atmosphere. I climbed the back stairs slowly, still in my cleaning apron, my shoes damp. I was not there to impress. I was just myself. Nathan Sterling stood behind his massive mahogany desk, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. "Come in," he said. I entered, but I did not sit. He did not offer a chair. "I want to understand what is happening," he began, his voice low but edged with a tension he couldn't hide. "My son has not responded to any professional, and yet he is drawing circles for you. Why?" I didn't answer right away. I met his gaze, not with defiance, but with a quiet calm. "Maybe because I did not ask him to." He frowned, taken aback by the simple, unadorned truth. "I did not bring you here to speak in riddles," he snapped, though the edge in his voice had softened slightly. "You are not trained. You are not a therapist. So why is he choosing you?" I took a single step forward. "Leo is not a case file," I said, my voice still quiet but firm. "He is not a project to be solved. He is a child in pain. And everyone who has walked into that garden with a checklist and a strategy has looked straight through him, as if he were not even there." I paused. I did not. He was silent, the truth of my words hitting him with an uncomfortable force. "I am used to controlling things," he finally admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "The company, the schedules. I thought keeping order would help him cope. But I do not know how to sit on the floor and wait for a child to smile." My heart ached for this powerful, broken man. Grief is not tidy. It is not a spreadsheet. It is messy. And children, they do not need you to keep everything perfect. They just need you to sit with them when everything falls apart. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of raw, unshielded humility in his eyes. "Why have you not said these things before?" I shrugged. "No one asked, and I do not speak to be heard. I speak when it is needed." A new kind of silence settled between us, not heavy, but necessary. "I need time to think," he said, almost to himself. I nodded and turned to go. "Anna," he called out as my hand touched the doorknob. I stopped. "I don't know what to do next." I glanced back over my shoulder. "You don't need to know what to do," I said softly. "You just need to be willing to stay long enough to find out." I left him there, sitting in his vast, silent office. He looked at the spot where I had been standing, then turned his gaze to the garden camera feed on his monitor. Leo was still there, drawing. But this time, Nathan didn't just watch. He reached out, and with a decisive click, switched off the screen. He didn't want to observe from a distance anymore. He wanted to be where the real things were happening, even if he didn't know how to begin. And then the moment, the miracle, finally came. It was a quiet afternoon. I was sitting with Leo on the floor of the glass-walled garden room. A bucket of bubble solution sat between us. I slowly lifted a wand, dipped it, and blew a single, perfect bubble. It floated upward, spinning lazily toward the ceiling. Leo followed it with his eyes, as he always did, but this time something was different.
His lips parted. His gaze never left the bubble, but his mouth shaped a single, perfect word. Sky. It was a whisper, softer than breath, but in the silent room, it was as loud as a thunderclap. I froze, the wand still poised at my lips. My heart seemed to stop. Leo blinked, seemingly unaware that he had just done something monumental. I didn't rush toward him. I didn't exclaim or cry or cheer. I knew this moment was a delicate, newborn thing. I only placed my hand lightly over his small, warm one. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice warm and steady, anchoring him. I did not ask him to repeat it. At that exact second, Nathan stepped into the room. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, he was just trying to be closer. When he heard the word, he froze, his breath catching in his throat. The coffee cup in his hand slipped from his grasp and shattered on the tiled floor. The sharp, violent sound cracked the air. Leo startled, his body going rigid, pulling his hand back from mine. The fragile, beautiful moment teetered on the edge of breaking. I turned to Nathan, my gaze calm but unwavering. Then, without a word, I took Leo's hand again, my grip steady and gentle. "It's okay," I repeated, my voice a soft, soothing balm. My focus was entirely on the boy, on keeping him anchored, on letting him know he was safe. Leo looked at me, his eyes searching mine for confirmation. I gave him a small, reassuring nod. Slowly, he exhaled, his small body relaxed. "It's just a cup," I said to him, but also to his father. "No one is angry." Nathan stood there, frozen, watching me hold his son's world together in a moment he had almost shattered. Later, when Leo was asleep, Nathan found me in the kitchen. In a rare flicker of raw humility, he murmured, Did he really speak?" I only nodded. "One word. That's enough." He didn't press for more. Deep down, he understood. If he made too much of it, he would frighten it away. From that day on, everything was different. Not louder, not more dazzling, just deeper. The rhythm of our days shifted. Bubbles first, then silence, then, sometimes, a word. Blue, sun, bird. The house began to soften. The rigid therapy schedules were replaced with quiet drawings, shared snacks, and the freedom to just be. Leo was no longer being treated. He was being seen. Nathan changed too. He started coming home earlier. He would sit at the edge of the garden, not joining our game, but just being present. He asked less. He listened more. One afternoon, Leo was sitting at the low table in the living room, a rainbow of crayons scattered around him. When I walked in, he looked up, smiled, and held up his drawing. On the paper were 3 stick figures, standing side by side. One was tall, with the square shoulders I recognized as his father's. One had messy curls, like me, and one was small, with its arms spread wide. Beneath them, in uneven but careful letters, was a single word: home. I lifted my hand to cover my mouth, a sob catching in my throat. I sat down beside him, pulled him into a hug, and let my tears fall in silence. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I whispered. That evening, Nathan saw the drawing on the dining table. He recognized the figures immediately. His hand hovered over the paper, as if his touch might damage something so precious. He looked at me, his eyes full of 1,000 unspoken words. No one needed to explain the meaning. It wasn't just 3 figures. It was what wasn't there. There were no walls, no distance, no separation. He placed his palm lightly over the word at the bottom. Home. Not a place, not an address,
but a choice.
Our fragile peace was shattered by a thick, formal envelope delivered to the front door. It was an emergency custody petition from Leo's maternal grandparents. The pages were a torrent of accusations, negligent supervision, emotional endangerment, and the damning charge of allowing an untrained, unqualified employee to have primary influence over the child. "They're afraid," I said softly to Nathan as he stared at the papers, his face pale. "They're trying to take him from me," he said, his voice raw. I met his gaze, my own voice firm. "Then fight," I said. "Fight like someone who has finally learned how to love him." The courtroom was a cold, sterile battleground. The grandparents' lawyer was relentless, holding up photos of me in my simple cleaning clothes, emphasizing my lack of credentials. "This isn't childcare," he thundered. "This is chaos." I sat silently behind Nathan, my hands folded in my lap. The judge, a woman with wise, tired eyes, listened patiently. At the end of the session, she did something no one expected. She called Leo forward. The room went still. "Leo," she said gently, "you don't have to speak if you don't want to, but I want to ask you one question. Who makes you feel safe?" The silence in the courtroom was a heavy, pressing thing. Every eye was on my boy. He stood, his small steps careful and deliberate, and he walked. He walked past his father. He walked past his grandparents. He walked past both teams of high-powered lawyers, and he stopped directly in front of me. He leaned toward the microphone on the table, and his lips shaped a single perfect word, a word that was almost a whisper, but that echoed through the silent room like a symphony. "Bubbles." The word hung in the air, simple, unexpected, and pure. The judge smiled, a real, warm smile. She said, "That's enough." She lowered her head, signed the papers on her desk, and then declared, "Custody remains with the father. Court is adjourned." As chaos erupted, my eyes stayed on Leo. He took my hand, his grip firm and unwavering. Nathan stepped forward, his chest heavy with words he had never spoken before. He looked at me, his voice rough. "Thank you." That night we returned home. Leo sat drawing. Nathan, still in his courtroom suit, stood in the doorway watching us. He had almost lost everything, and a single whispered word had reminded the entire world, and him, of what truly mattered. A year later, Leo was no longer the silent boy. He didn't speak a lot, but his words were like small, precious jewels. "The moon is quiet, like you, Anna. Dad's laugh sounds like the wind." Nathan had learned not to rush, but to wait, to listen, and the love between us, between Nathan and me, it didn't arrive with a clap of thunder. It grew gently, in the quiet spaces, in the shared glances, in the comfortable silences we never needed to fill. One spring afternoon, under the drifting cherry blossoms, Nathan knelt on the stone patio, right where Leo had drawn his first circle. He didn't bring a diamond, he didn't make a speech. He just asked one question, a whisper on the wind. "Can you stay, as you always have, forever?" I didn't hesitate. I nodded, a breath of a yes, as steady and as sure as the stone beneath us. Our wedding was on a bright May morning. It was simple, soft, with white blooms and a kind sunlight. Leo stood between us, holding not a ring pillow, but a small wooden bubble wand. And as Nathan and I exchanged our rings, our vows, our lives, my boy looked up, his eyes shining, and he gently blew. Tiny, shimmering bubbles rose into the air, weightless, silent, and yet, somehow, they said everything. It was a promise made of breath and silence. It was a love that was not loud, not flawless, but real. Chosen, kept, and healed. Perhaps we will not see you again, so subscribe to this channel to listen to more interesting stories.